What's up, YouTube? This is Mr. Mathematics, and I am here with ArtisticLayman, and we are live. We're going to be discussing Black Lives Matter, Christianity, racism, and I'm sure a video I made about Pastor James White. Real quick, I want to tell you a little bit about myself in case you're new. I'm a middle-aged Black man, married, father of daughters. I'm a Christian and a scientist. I started my YouTube channel, Mr. Mathematics, basically to spread truth and rational thought in an effort to help Black people and in turn make the world a better place for this generation and those who come after. Just so that you know how we got here, I made a video about Pastor James White, and in creating content for my channel, I stumbled upon his, and he's basically kind of speaking about Black Lives Matter and racism. And I'd say he's, from his theological perspective, he's offering that Black Lives Matter is a non-Christian perspective on how to handle racism. And there's kind of a common theme, in my opinion. I don't really know what the theological name of it would be, but they do this thing where they kind of sort of eliminate race as part of the conversation, eliminate ethnicity as part of the conversation. There's a couple of Bible verses, I think like Galatians 3 and Colossians 3, where they talk about this idea of no Greek and no Jew, and sort of like erase ethnicity with those verses. So I made my video. I sent it to my new friend ArtisticLayman here, and we got going in the comment section pretty good. It got interesting, and he offered that we go live and just bring the discussion to YouTube and the people, and that's how we got here. So I want to introduce ArtisticLayman. Go ahead and tell the people who you are, what you got going on, and you have an opening statement, I believe.
Sure. Thank you for having me on, Mr. Mathematics. And whether or not we're still friends or not, we shall see at the end of this presentation. But I guess as introductions go, I self-identify as a pseudo-intellectual Christian fanatic, but realistically, I'm a wannabe artist and an occasional YouTuber. And I guess this subject is let me first start off by explaining how I stumbled onto your video. Basically, I was watching the YouTube channel What Do You Meme, and he made a reference to hashtag Black Lives Matters to Christ. And so, out of curiosity, I decided to enter into Google into Twitter, and your channel was the first thing that came up. And I saw James White, and I like James White's presentations because he's very Calvinistic Reformed, and I'm Calvinistic Reformed. And so I thought, oh, cool, this would be cool to see what they have this topic on. And the arguments were very... Well, it's not so much because I can't really agree or disagree with your arguments, because I realize you're approaching the Black Lives Matter movement or the argument from just the grammatical context, rather trying to talk about Black Lives Matter independent of the movement, which I don't see happening anyway, because I mean, from my perspective, trying to separate Black Lives Matter, the phrase, from the movement is like trying to separate the Roman salute from Nazism. I mean, the Roman salute is cool, but you can't really remove that without being associated with Nazism. And it's interesting because some of the arguments you have are like, because I saw some of your videos. I'm trying to understand where you're coming from with this, because since you're separating yourself from the Black Lives Matter movement, I'm still trying to figure out what exactly you think Black Lives Matter is. Like, you mentioned how James White shouldn't talk about his philosophy from the pulpit, but of course, since he's a systematic theologian, he's going to argue logically and philosophically what his position is from the Bible and the God and how it relates to Black Lives Matter, and well, it's. And also, basically what James White was trying to argue, if I can make the part of the opening statement, is basically, maybe you can clarify this, because basically what James White is doing, what most Christians do in the circles I said, is that Black Lives Matter, it can only be made a relevant statement is because Black Lives Matter because all lives matter. And the reason why all lives matter is because all lives are made in the image of God. Or I like how Andrew Clavin put it in his little video about Black Lives Matter, back in 2015, where he says, here at Revolting Truth, he said, quote, "We don't believe that all Black lives matter, and we don't even believe that all lives matter. We believe that each life matters because each of us is made in the image of God." And no, really, because if we weren't, we would just be matter, and it wouldn't matter. And so maybe, I'm also wasn't really a fan about, and you also put a lot of bravado and nice little cuts and edits, which I thought were didn't really conducive to the conversation. But maybe we can examine what you want Black Lives Matter to be, or what you're trying to argue Black Lives Matter to be. And so that's that concludes my opening statement.
Okay, great. So I think the first thing to do is talk about basically what do I think Black Lives Matter is. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm addressing this from basically like a common sense worldview, what we are dealing with in reality in the streets. When I say we, I'm talking about everybody, me, you, we go to work, we go to the grocery store, like Black Lives Matter in that context. I do want to like revisit some of the details that you were talking about as far as like theology and all of that's concerned. But I am, what's important to me is I want to stress to the world that Black Lives Matter. I think the average person who likes that phrase, who says it, who believes in it, is intending to discuss the literal definition and not the organization. You still there?
Oh yes, I'm still here.
Okay. Not the organization, or we have like Marxism being brought up, and people are pointing out these like far left, extreme socialist philosophers and movements and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, for the average, I guess I would say in this context, I'm almost acting like a black apologist, right? Where you have a Christian apologist. I'm like, listen, for the average black person, we're not talking about socialism. We don't care about these socialist philosophers and all this stuff. We just want equality, and Black Lives Matter, meaning not our lives don't matter more and they don't matter less, but just that they matter. And we're trying to address the social issue in America where we're saying that we're seeing that their lives are not being treated equally. And for us specifically, we see this issue, we're bringing it up, and that's the source and a reason for the statement, right? It's a reaction to real world events. So does that help clarify what I mean when I say Black Lives Matter?
Well, I understand. Well, the whole thing has, the Black Lives Matter movement has always prefaced itself as a response to real life events. But are you at all different from the arguments that the organization makes, or like?
Yeah.
Maybe define what you think it means. What the reaction is.
Yeah. So the reaction means that the statement is meant to bring attention to racism, to like police brutality, to generic social injustice, right? I don't want I certainly make a major distinction between what I'm arguing and what I think the average black person that you see with a Black Lives Matter t-shirt on, or even at a protest. So when a Black Lives Matter protest happens, there's a part of me who kind of does want to be there, right? I recognize that lately a lot of those events have unfortunately like declined into violence and conflict and all other sorts of things. And in my desire to avoid that, I have not personally participated. But when I think about doing it, my desire to be out there is to say to the world, yes, Black Lives Matter, racism is wrong, police brutality is wrong, and that's all I'm trying to say, right? I am not there to advocate for the organization. And so I want to make that distinction, because although I acknowledge certainly that the organization they created the phrase, to be fair to them. They created the phrase, and admittedly it's very difficult to separate the organization from the meaning of the phrase. But when I see like LeBron James on television wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, I am very confident that LeBron James is not a Marxist. LeBron James is not interested in some of the people that James White mentions in his video, these philosophers, these socialist philosophers that are sort of people. You'd have to be very, very serious into politics and like philosophy to even know who they are. And so I think like that's what I'm trying to say is like people are condemning Black Lives Matter because of the organization, but we have people like LeBron James saying Black Lives Matter, and like LeBron James is not there to destroy the nuclear family. He has a nuclear family. You know what I'm saying? So does that help you? Does that allow you to
Okay, so I guess I kind of see I do see your point. You're trying to make the, like, rather than politics and all arguments aside, we're trying to make the point that Black Lives Matter. And
Exactly.
the thing is, I don't really understand what that has to do with James White, though, because James White. I mean, you wouldn't be arguing that James White thinks that Black lives don't matter. I mean, that's not your point, right?
My point, well, no. I mean, that would be kind of like accusing James White outright of being a racist, which I don't want to do that. I don't think that that's fair. I was critical of his video because he makes at least so one of the first things he does is he proposes, and I think you kind of mentioned it as well. This kind of like theological perspective where there's this argument being made that, you know, if God doesn't exist, or we don't have God and we don't have Christianity and we don't have that framework to think of the world in, then nothing matters, right? That our lives don't matter, that you know, we're all, you know, like, I think he says something like we're, you know, ugly bags of water, mostly water, and this kind of thing. And so it's like, all right, from a hardcore theological standpoint, I can entertain that conversation. However, you know, when you make that argument from like the pulpit, you put it on YouTube, I would imagine that you're basically more so communicating with the general world, right? And for the general world, we have people who may not even be Christian, but I think even if you take, not that I don't believe this, I believe in God, but even if you take God out of the conversation, my life matters to me, and your life matters to you. James White's life, I'm sure, matters to him. You know what I mean? If you throw him in the ocean, he's going to try to swim, right? He doesn't want to drown. No one wants to die. And so, I like, it's a great theological, you know, philosophical debate point that, okay, life doesn't matter outside of the context of Christ, but I don't think it is viable in the real world with normal people. You know, I can find a guy who doesn't believe in God, and I assure you, he still believes that his life matters. And so, it was an initial reaction and sort of a critique of him of just offering that concept in general. I don't agree with it, but that is really a minor. That's kind of like the first thing that he mentions, and so I did address it, but I think it's a minor point in in my broader complaint and critique of his work.
And if I can make an offhanded comment on, or some comments on that, it's that this is actually because this is actually something I wanted to mention. Hopefully, you talk about, because this is something that atheists actually use to argue to justify kind of moral statements.
Right.
Like I've called him to Matt Dillahunty's a couple of times, and he's actually made the argument, yeah, there is no God to give life objective value, but my life is valuable to me. To what is subjectively valuable to him, to which I'm left wondering, well, what does that matter? I mean, I understand your life is valuable to you, but does it mean your life is subjectively matters, therefore it objectively matters? Well, we never got past that point, but
yeah, I get it, and I would just say, like, you know, my life matters to me. My life also matters to my children, to my wife, and to my family. You know, like, I think you're hard pressed to demonstrate in a form that anyone is realistically going to adopt and accept outside of a college classroom, that life doesn't matter without Christ, right? Like, you have parents, I'm sure, you know, whatever your family might be, like, our lives matter to each other, and it hurt. I don't want, you know what I'm saying, if I was like outside and I saw someone being hurt for no reason, like, that bothers me. I'm compelled to help. It's built into our DNA. Now, you can argue that God made us this way, and I really don't want to be on the side of arguing, well, it doesn't matter if God exists. I mean, to me it does, but I just think that it's sort of a point that is, I mean, it sounds good on paper, but it doesn't sound good in the real world to say that, you know, life doesn't matter unless Jesus Christ is defining the meaning of everything.
Well, he is
But
James White is he's a Christian, as a
yeah,
pastor. He's going to be apologetic to the word, and so
understood.
everything he's going to be arguing from is from a biblical perspective. And so, he's
Right.
if you watch James White often enough, you'll notice that he's always arguing with people who he disagrees with and bringing up the sheer contrast of what being a Christian actually means and what being an atheist or being a believer actually means and what it implies. And so, just as an offhand comment, because if we're going to argue the point, if Black Lives Matter is biblical, it would make sense that they're going to argue from the idea that God exists and that Jesus Christ is our Savior.
Yeah. Sure. So, I mean, I guess I would say, in reaction to what you're saying, is that James White, free country, he's free to offer his theological view on the issue and all that. As a common man, I watched the video, and my feeling is like that. It's I was attempting to speak to a different audience, right? Like I'm not necessarily here to convince a theologian that the way that he thinks of the world when he's in a classroom with a blackboard and other basically like professors and whatnot, and they're arguing over apologetics and hermeneutics and all that kind of stuff. But my voice is to what I would say like the common person, and it's like from a common perspective, I'm critical of that idea. Although I get that there's a context in which it's very important to argue from that point. But I digress.
So I guess to bring it back to help us. So since that's really like a minor point, you also believe that's a minor point.
Yeah.
So I guess what would be a biblical so you're saying that but it seems to me like it seems to me that what you're arguing when you're arguing for Black Lives Matter, you are arguing for an effect that seems to imply that all lives matter. Because it seems to suggest
exactly.
And it just seems kind of weird that you're always appealing to this statement of Black Lives Matter, because you can't really separate that, and it just seems like you're trying to invoke. When I watch your videos and your other comments, I think it seems like you're trying to invoke Black Lives Matter as a clarion call that all Christians should engage in, even
Agreed.
though as James White points out, I would reiterate that the biblical standpoint is that all lives matter, and so it just doesn't seem it doesn't making sense to invoke Black Lives Matter.
So okay. I would agree with you in the broader sense that all lives matter to God and to Christ, right? From a Christian's perspective, everyone's lives matter, no question about it, right? We're agreed there. But then I think if you put realistic, real world context into the conversation, right? I would argue that in the last 10 to 20 years, there has never been a significant disagreement on the idea that all lives matter in Christ, and like the all lives matter argument, I think is the original perspective, right? Like that's how the world view was for a Christian, and then we have real world events, right? We have racism in the real world. We have a couple events that stand out: Trayvon Martin being killed or murdered by George Zimmerman, or at least I would say unjustifiably, killed. And then that was when Black Lives Matter, the statement, was born, right? So I think it's clear when, in the reaction to Trayvon Martin's death, some people were seeing and feeling and believing, which I think is to be true, that the life of a Black person was not treated with equal value to that of, let's just say, a white person in America. And Trayvon Martin's death was a good example of that problem. And so we say Black Lives Matter, we're saying that Black lives should matter, and they should be counted equally in the conversation of all lives matter. So I mean, to me, it's almost like when you say all lives matter, and then if you want to break all lives matter into what are the pieces that make that up, right? You could say Black Lives Matter, Brown Lives Matter, you can say Asian Lives Matter, right? You can break all these subgroups out from what all means, and they should be equivalent, right? Like some of those parts should still match when we say all lives matter. And then the issue is that some of those pieces are not actually being put into the conversation, right? So they're sort of like not being treated as if they belong there. And that's our point. Is like, hey, you forgot Black lives in your all lives idea.
So you're really of the opinion that Trayvon Martin was unjustifiably killed.
Oh yes, I am. Yeah.
And why do you say that?
Well, okay, so Trayvon Martin, I haven't looked at the details in a while, but the thing there is, I think one of the important points is like what happened to Trayvon Martin. Had it happened to some a person who like a white person, a white kid, same age, I mean it's a kind of a cheap trick, but I like to use like Donald Trump's son as a and I don't wish any harm on him. I'm just saying that we know Donald Trump is a rich white person with power, right? And so if Donald Trump's son was killed by basically a neighborhood watch, person who's really acting as a vigilante, you got the police on the phone telling him, don't engage, wait for the police to get there, and some fight breaks out, however it happens, and the kid who's unarmed turns up dead. I think George Zimmerman goes to prison, and I think his life is basically ended. Instead of this, he was exonerated. I mean, they found him not guilty, and he walked away after doing almost everything wrong as far as common sense is concerned, as far as the guidance that law enforcement was giving him. I mean, it's just kind of a ridiculous. To me, it's ridiculous to think that it was necessary that George Zimmerman killed Trayvon Martin, or even that it was I don't think it should have been a legal thing. I think that should have been that. What happened to Trayvon Martin, I think, should be considered illegal.
So killing someone in self-defense should be considered illegal.
So that is the dispute, right? I mean, that was George Zimmerman's defense is that he killed him in self-defense, but we do not know what happened during that fight, right? I mean, we can only you have. It's basically like it was a he said, she said, and we have to sort of read into and make assumptions about what we think happened. But I don't believe that.
I see what you're saying. So we have to, since there was no video recording of the incident, the only thing we have to go on is the autopsy, the eyewitnesses, the autopsy reports, and anything else indirect, which is usually the case for most murder cases.
Yeah, sure. And very important is that there's no real witnesses that could potentially act on behalf of Trayvon Martin, right? Like all we have is the person who's alive telling us a story that may be intended to cover his butt rather than it be the truth, right? I mean, recently it happened with Ahmaud Arbery, right? The jogger guy. He's like running down the street. Obviously there's some people are saying that he had burglarized the home or whatever the case might be. I don't know that that's true, but the idea of self-defense, you cannot chase someone down, grab them, stop them, and then claim that you're defending yourself when they start fighting you back, right? Like, in other words, George Zimmerman engaged Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was walking home in his own neighborhood, in his parents' neighborhood, and was confronted by George Zimmerman, right? He was confronted by George Zimmerman, and then he argues that, well, somehow a fight breaks out and he shot him in self-defense. It's like, bro, if you start the fight, it's not self-defense when you kill someone. The issue, I think, is that Trayvon Martin's not there to say what happened, and there's no video, there's no eyewitness of like how it happened. But generally, as I understand it, the law does not allow you to argue self-defense when you engage someone, especially in the public, in their own neighborhood, right? I mean, self-defense is just like you attacked me and I protected myself from you. Like you coming up to me, bothering me, trying to grab me or trying to say that you're going to restrain me until the police get here and all that. That's not self-defense. That's you inciting a conflict.
Which I can bring around to like a topic of what my bigger concern is about the Black Lives Matter argument. You mentioned you were comparing, you were bringing up Trayvon Martin and mentioning how if the race had been changed or the power had been changed, it would have been a whole other different question.
Yeah.
And to which actually brings me to an analogy which would be perfect for this situation, which is George Floyd, which of course which has been the biggest focus throughout the entire country. And right. Just out of curiosity, are you familiar with the story of Tony Tempa?
No, you'd have to tell me about that.
Well, Tony Tempa was in 2016. He was a white man who was killed by cops, and oddly enough, killed in a way that is incredibly similar to that of George Floyd. But of course, here's the biggest difference. George Floyd was killed because someone called him for using a counterfeit $20 bill or something, and mm-hmm. Tony Tempa he called the cops because he was scared because he was schizophrenic. Mm-hmm. And so this story, the Tony Tempa and George Floyd are very incredibly similar to each other, very different, which is much more dynamic in this. And we have little to no coverage on Tony Tempa, and worst of all, the cops who killed him, the charges have basically been dropped for an arbitrary reason. And mm-hmm. my biggest concern about the whole Black Lives Matter movement is that the question about police brutality is not exclusively a racial issue, it is a power issue. It is the question of the people who are entrusted with enforcing the law. When they go too far, they're never held accountable. And my biggest concern is by always making it about race, which of course you and I are going to disagree on the effects of whatever given issue. But if the argument is not about treating all lives matter and saying that the cops can't keep getting away with this, by making it only a racial issue, we're never going to resolve the issue of police brutality.
Okay. So, I would say, look, I'm okay with people being generally opposed to police brutality, right? I think that's basically like kind of the perspective you're speaking from, is like police brutality happens to everybody, and it's not okay, it's not right, and we should be against it. And I'm against it. I'm confident, that most Black people are against it, and so that doesn't bother me, right? I guess your concern where you say that, okay, when we bring up Black Lives Matter and we're fighting against police brutality in that sense, to me, I was kind of like, I agree. Someone should be fighting and advocating for your guy, Tony Temple, or I didn't catch his name exactly, but so someone should be advocating and fighting against what happened. And I wouldn't argue. I mean, I don't think that Black people don't care about it, right? It's like right now we've got Black Lives Matter, which was rejuvenated by the death of George Floyd, and I think there's a lot of people who, white people who saw what happened to George Floyd and felt compassion about it, felt that it was wrong, agreed, right? They might not be in the streets shouting Black Lives Matter. They might never, tout hashtag or whatever, but maybe internally they see that what happened was wrong. And I think that would be the same sentiment on Black people if it happens to someone who's white. We don't want to see that either. No one wants to see that. I mean, I think it takes a lot for anyone to be out protesting and fighting, you know what I mean, and putting yourself at risk to raise the issue socially. But I think that's just sort of like comes down to your interest in yourself. It's like yourself, your identification, right? So it's like if a Black person is killed due to police brutality, and we believe that's the case, if Black people aren't going to stand up for that, then we cannot expect anyone else to do it, right? So we have to, in that case, we have to stand up for George Floyd and what happened to him. And for example, if your guy, the example that you gave, I'm sure his family has a problem with it. I'm sure there's people in the community that have a problem with it. I agree that it hasn't been raised to the same level of public notoriety. But I think that also has to do with the fact that what happened to your guy is much more is considered in our society to be a rare exception. And what happened to George Floyd, I think a lot of people would agree is almost like par for the course, status quo. like our society, the history of America, we have an environment here where Black people are traditionally and commonly disadvantaged, and because that's happening, you know, I think it's reasonable to see that, you know, we deal with it on a regular basis, and it is more outrageous to us because it's commonplace. You know, we've seen so many people do things that we believe are wrong and be exonerated. Are you familiar with Philandro Castile, who I think I did a different video about that. You know who Philandro Castile is?
Enlighten me.
Okay, so he was basically he's basically like, I mean, he's a lunchroom worker, right? So he works at like a middle school, and I presume he's like, you know, flipping out the food that he's putting on the kids' trays or whatever, right? So I'm painting this picture to show you that he's not some, you know, gangbanger, some dangerous person, some, you know, big time criminal or anything like that. The guy works in a middle school, feeding kids lunch. He's in the car riding with the mother of his children. It might have been his wife, I'm not sure. And I believe the child was in the car as well. This little kid looks like she's probably 6 or 7 years old. Gets pulled over. The police say on the, like, because they have the like the dash cam and all the radio recordings. The police are basically saying that I think the car matches the description, and maybe the people inside match the description of some burglary or crime that has occurred, right? So they pull him over, and I'm kind of speculating because I'm, you know, I don't have the details of the case built into my head, but I know he gets pulled over. He does what every, you know, most Black men in America are at this point trained to do by their friends and family and people that care about him, is that he's complying with the police 100% as much as possible, because he recognizes and he knows we all know that there is there is a more of a likely chance, and it shouldn't be this way, but it is, that I may be viewed or considered to be very dangerous, and the police officer may react to something that I do in a way that maybe you would not ever experience. And so the police asked him, you know, for his information, his driver's license, et cetera, right? Philandro Castile has a firearm, and he has a concealed carry license, right? So he's legally armed in his car, and he does his best to notify to the police, like, officer, I have a firearm on me. The police officer says, okay, just don't pull it out. He's like, no problem, right? But he wants his license and registration, so he's like, all right. He goes for his license and registration. He's like reaching into his pocket to get something out of his wallet. The police officer starts kind of like, you know, screaming at him, don't pull it out, don't pull it out. And the lady in the car is saying he's not pulling out a gun. The guy already told the police that I have a gun. You tell the police officer that I have a gun so that in case he finds it, it's not an issue. I mean, if you ask me for my license and registration, I reach into my pocket, I'm getting my license and registration. It's something that I would imagine you would do. You've done every single time you've ever been pulled over. You may not have even had to say to the officer, hey, it's just my wallet, okay? And you got to lean over and make sure you can see it, right? We take every precaution possible to make sure that the police officer doesn't say he thinks he saw a gun. It's like, why would I, you know? And so the end of the story is that Philandro Castile gets shot multiple times by the police officer. That, you know, the police officer is kind of complaining, I told him not to pull out the gun. The lady's saying he wasn't pulling out the gun. It's all on camera. And the police officer is exonerated. Okay, now I would not advocate that the officer is held accountable for like premeditated murder or anything like that, but there needs to be liability in those situations. Someone has to be held responsible when we cannot have police officers shooting people and saying that they thought they had a gun. And it happens, you know, more often with a Black person, and this argument, and it's just kind of continuously swept under the rug. And some of that power that you're talking about, it doesn't even need to be money. It can just be inherent power that a white person has in America, and that kind of brings up that point of white privilege that I think we also have some contention over.
Well, police killings are really hard to number, but as far as I can tell, the only first article I found in deaths resulting from police harm is there actually is, because the number I'm looking at here is like from a Washington Post article. Is there in 2019, according to this article, there was 452 unarmed white deaths and 336 black deaths. And so these numbers would suggest that it's not a disproportionate, and also there's a much larger one in armed ones for white people. I wish I could show the picture to you, but I'm not sure if it'll show up. It'll appear.
Yeah, you can share a screen if you want.
Here it is. Let's see. Right here, I tried to save this for a document. So basically, right here, the deaths resulting from police harm by ethnicity. And there's always this narrative idea that this is happening a lot more. But I think the biggest question is that no one's really talking about, because whenever I look at the news, there's always sensationalizing, or they're talking about the stories of cops killing black people. But it would seem that the cops are killing everybody, and also they are killing white people to the same degree, but no one cares about the white people. In fact, and not to make the whole woe as to the white people, but because the greatest question is, like, if we're going to address this, if we're going to address police brutality, it has to be an issue of police brutality, because the biggest problem is that not that they're reacting inappropriately, or I guess the point I want to drive back to that point, but basically the cops are killing people and not being held accountable. Yeah. And it's not, and your concern for the Black Lives Matter is that they're more likely to do that, but that's not neither here nor there. But of course, the topic of white privilege is something else to go off with, because when you use Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement, the people who run it. What's that?
Can I just one more thing? I don't want it to get left before we move on. We can do research later, because I'm not certain of this, but for example, in the stats you were showing, it's like, okay, 3,000 white people are killed by cops, 2,000 black people are killed by cops, or you can put black and brown people together, right? And but as far as the rate at which people are killed, right? When you consider the population of the country, and black people are like 15% of the people in the country, us having a similar number to the amount of white people that are getting killed, it shows that that would be disproportionate, right? I just wanted to offer that. I don't have the stats in front of me to prove it at the moment, but
because black people only consist of 13% of the population, and with all these deaths, and the numbers are almost equal in that regard. But of course, we could also talk about the crime rate within the black community, which might cause cops to interact with the black community further.
Sure.
Because because there's always that problem with, because the cops going into areas where more crime is, so they can be prepared when the crime occurs, and because they're being called in the black community, the negative experiences are happening. Which of course, if white privilege was really a thing, I expect the numbers to be almost downright abysmal. But maybe the problem is that there are just so many white people, no one's going to notice if one more white person gets killed by a cop.
Yeah.
But to go off on the topic of,
I was trying to check see if we have anyone talking in the comment section here, but go ahead because I think we're about to get into the
white privilege.
This is what I want to talk about.
Yeah, because it's interesting that you keep trying to separate the Black Lives Matter sentence from the Black Lives Matter movement, because the people have been caught, like the What Do You Meme video was talking about the connections with the Marxist or quote socialist mentality, and because the whole notion of white privilege has been a topic that I've been of particular interest to me, because I first heard the topic of white privilege from Tim Wise, which was he's an academic kind of type, which talks about this notion that white people are not familiar with the situation of their surroundings, when really it's trying to suggest that white people are either oblivious or unaware of the injustice in their society, because society is made for them particularly, which of course raises the question, because when I first heard this, okay, maybe there's something I don't know about. I don't know is oppression that happens. Maybe there is something to that, but of course the more I research it, the more I realize this is more or less like the product of what majority privilege, because when you're in a when you're a member of the majority society, you're not going to notice that. But the thing is, when you do notice that, you are sympathetic to it. But if we're really going to talk, but the thing is, the term white privilege is a very divisive topic, because you're suggesting that white people distinctively, uniquely as a race, are not capable of understanding this topic, and therefore they have something to repent of because they're participating in a white privileged society.
Yeah. So, Um, right. So, all right, it's very hard for me to to move on because you mentioned the what do you mean, and so like in general, right? We have a bunch of Christian YouTube channels, a bunch of Christian voices um, speaking out against the Black Lives Matter organization. And I think that criticism is totally valid from a Christian perspective and even from a social perspective, right? Like, you don't have to be a Christian to not be in agreement with, like no longer taking like the nuclear family being somehow viewed as not good, and I honestly don't really believe that there's a big problem with patriarchy either, but that's for another day. Um, but I just think that it's sort of like, I think that there's so many voices saying Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter is not good, and then they point to the organization, right? And that is fair criticism, except for the fact that almost everyone who is an advocate for Black Lives Matter is not advocating for the organization. We're all advocating for the inherent meaning of the statement, right? And I think you take a poll, overwhelmingly, you're going to find that Black people are saying we're against police brutality. You will not find many, if any, Black people saying that we want to create a communist America or a Marxist America. So that is the issue to me, is that it's sort of an unfair attachment being made between the common Black person's view and what the Christians and theologians are critiquing. It's like you're critiquing something that we're not advocating for. And so I'm trying to put a stop to that, right? It's like, when you hear Black Lives Matter, I ask that everyone be distinct and specific about what they're talking about. If you want to talk about the organization, great. In the video that James White made, he critiques the organization and the statement. And that is the bigger issue, right? Is that, like, what is wrong with Black Lives Matter? But all right, I digress. We're going to do white privilege. So you said that, okay, so one thing
to put it in more simpler terms, white privilege, to put in, like, it has also evolved into a concept called white fragility, which is a even more ridiculous term. But basically, white privilege is a kind of secular version of original sin that white people have in society.
Yeah, and so see, I have never heard that, and I don't know where that perspective on it might come from, except maybe from someone who is coming into the conversation with a desire to critique it, right? Maybe they just don't like it. They're the same person is likely against the idea of Black Lives Matter, even the statement itself. They're going to be critical of that as well. And it's like James White, right? It's perfect. He's accusing the statement white privilege and people who use it of basically being racist. And I don't see the average white person as being guilty of any original sin when it comes to white privilege. White privilege to me is something that you would benefit from by default, and it does not require any action or awareness on your part. So, the easy example is me and you are playing basketball one-on-one, and we get into a fight, you know what I mean? Or we kind of have a little dispute or disagreement. And if someone calls the police and the police officer shows up, it's very likely that the police officer is going to point his gun at me and ask you if everything is okay. You know what I mean? It's like, and so there's this default expectation that a Black person is more dangerous, is likely to be the person who committed the crime, or is the person that needs to be restrained and all this kind of stuff. And I would not blame you at all. You didn't do anything, right? It's the person who shows up with bias in their heart and mind, and handles the situation unfairly, is the person who is guilty. And I'm not saying that all police officers do it. I'm just saying that it is I think a known and commonly recognized phenomena that happens in America. Like, we all kind of know that you're going to get the benefit of the doubt more often and more likely than I am. And that is white privilege. I'm not saying that you did anything wrong. I'm just saying that there is an advantage in being white in America that black people are not privy to. And so I don't think anyone is going around like saying that any particular white person is doing anything wrong. We're saying that there is an advantage to being the white majority in America.
Well, just out of curiosity, what would it imply if the cop who showed up pointing the gun at you was black?
Right. So the cop shows up, points the gun at me, happens to be black, right? I would say that is he may still be giving you a benefit of the doubt that I don't get, and I think it's a better example even because the person who is upholding and invoking the privilege is a black person, right? This black person is giving you the benefit of the doubt and allowing you to have an advantage in a situation that should have been treated fairly.
So wouldn't it be more accurate to say that the cop is being a racist rather than saying he's invoking a white privilege?
Sure, yeah. No, I mean, white privilege, I guess, is simply another way of saying that there's racism in America. I mean, what we're saying is that it's white privilege is a blanket way to like speak to the day-to-day occurrences of racism in America that white people are sort of like exempt and don't have to experience, and on the other end the black person like experiences commonly, and we find to be frustrating and difficult, right?
And why do you think that is? What causes that, like with the situation where the cop is not going to give the black person the benefit of the doubt?
Right. So I think that there's a number of factors, and one of them is like, and I want to be honest and straightforward on this, is that I acknowledge that black people in America, we are commonly like disadvantaged. We have our incomes are significantly lower. Our job opportunities are significantly lower. We're in a bad state in general, right? In America, we know that there are some historical reasons and explanations for those things. I don't think that there is inherently anything wrong with the DNA of black people. I think we're perfectly capable of being successful and functioning and taking advantage of the so-called American dream, just like anyone else is. I mean, I can tell you that my life is comparable to that in a lot of ways, right? I do not fit many of the stereotypes or statistics that you might find. So some of it, at this point, it's like, yes, as a community, as black people, we certainly do need to take responsibility at this point for our situation, what's going on, and not to say that there aren't like good explanations for how we got here, and it's not all our fault, but it's sort of that like, pull yourself up from your bootstraps type of situation where it's like, I don't think it makes sense for black people to count on or to count on anyone else to help us out of our situation. I think that we have lots of ways and opportunities that we can turn our situation around for ourselves, and I think it's better that way because we want to be able to say that we made this happen for ourselves. We don't want to say the government saved us. We don't want to say that like, oh, thank you white people for like making our lives better finally. Like, I think we can do it on our own, and you'll find those ideas from people like Marcus Garvey, Booker T. Washington, Malcolm X, the Nation of Islam. There's lots of people who offer solutions to Black America that I think are viable, and I obviously have to preface that by saying none of those people are perfect, and there's like known criticisms of some of those people, like the Nation of Islam, Farrakhan, people like that. So I just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? I take the solution that they're offering, and I would like remove myself from the parts of that I don't agree with. But in addition to the historical reasons why,
How about Larry Elder?
I know about him. I've been seeing him brought up in conservative circles, so I got to do my research on him.
Well,
So
yeah, you'd really like if based on what you just said, you'd really like that. He actually recently just came out with a documentary called Uncle Tom, and talking about like the typical, because he's a black conservative, and so his typical experience, like most black conservatives, is being demonized by the political opposition as a traitor, as a race traitor.
Right. And so we got to put a pin on that because I definitely want to deal with that. Just real quick, I'll try and say that I think there is a very important distinction, because I identify as a conservative, right? Like, in my opinion, I do not generally, my ideas and beliefs don't generally line up with the Democratic Party anymore. That being said, the major concern for me with the Republican Party or the so-called right wing and all that is I am 100% certainly in opposition and conflict with racism. And so a lot of the voices, that the black conservative voices that you'll hear, I listen to like ABL and Officer Tatum. I've heard of the guy that you're mentioning, and Larry Elder, and I think a lot of them are a lot more tolerant of racism, and some of the points of race is where we would differ, right? So because you're not going to hear Larry Elder or ABL or anybody or Officer Tatum, they're diametrically opposed to Black Lives Matter, both the organization and the sentiment, and that is a significant difference between us. So I really wouldn't want to be like, I don't want you to think that me and Larry Elder are going to agree with each other, because I'm pretty sure we won't. But the last point I wanted to make on our situation, black people's situation in America, and why when the police officer arrives at the scene, he thinks I'm the bad guy and you're the good guy. We also have a lot of negative images in the media. And this is another one where really, like, I made a video about Cardi B. She's got some new video where she's kind of like sexualizing black women, right?
And the comment section is the most funniest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's like, that's another point where it's like, I think we have to take responsibility for participating in producing that content, right? Like, I grew up in the 90s with gangster rap, which I enjoyed as a time, and I can still, maybe enjoy it from time to time. Maybe it's hypocritical of me. I might need to think that through. But I wanted to be like Snoop Dogg. You know what I mean? I wanted to be like Dr. Dre. They are the reason that I thought smoking weed and drinking was going to be cool. And I was 13, 14 years old. You know what I'm saying? That imagery that we put out, people grow up on that, and it brainwashes them. We're conditioned, right, to think black guy dangerous. I mean, there's certain kinds of white people that are dangerous. Right? If I see a white guy with a shaved head and tattoos, he kind of scares me too. You know what I mean? Like, I get that skinhead or biker vibe from him. But so many people have that conditioned in their mind that the media has all of these negative images of black people, and it's been historically only within the last, I would say, like 10 years have things changed. I mean, like, you got the first black Disney princess was created, in like the 2000s. I mean, so imagine, right? The average white woman grows up her entire life, right? If she's lucky, she's blonde hair and blue eyed. Every single beautiful girl hero has looked like her, right? And she sees that, so it reinforces her self-esteem. And then the black woman sees that, and she recognizes that she doesn't look like that, and she may come away with a low self-esteem because of that. And everybody in America is all bombarded with that same imagery. So that creates 20, 30 years later this effect when the police officer shows up. He's seeing Snow White, and I'm the bad guy. You know what I mean? And I can give you like a real world example. I know that I know someone who went to went to South Africa to study abroad, right? In college, they went to South Africa, a woman, and she said that on a regular basis, she met black South Africans that were confused and surprised that she was not like the women in the rap videos that they had been watching on television, right? Even other black South Africans are getting this same message from media in America. And so this is one of those points where I say these are the kinds of things that as black people we need to stop participating in. We need to basically like make our dollar speak for ourselves, and I acknowledge that it's very difficult to do it, but we have to start making decisions that work for our common good for the long run, and not doing, and stop giving everybody a pass. Like we gave Cardi B a pass. You have black people advocating for Cardi B's WAP video as some sort of like women empowerment, and I'm like, we have so many better examples of black women working together, being powerful, like Oprah Winfrey, Michelle Obama. We have our Kamala Harris running for vice president. Like that's the imagery that a black young lady needs to see, not being told that what Cardi B is doing is cool and it's empowering. That's kind of just ridiculous. So that I'm trying to, all of that is going into that question that you asked, is like, why is it that when the cop pulls up, black or white, why does he think I'm bad because I'm black and you're not bad because you're white? And it's the media, it's history, and there's some black people, we are making some bad decisions on our own end that we can, and that's one of the things that I get excited about, is because like I recognize that as a tangible thing that we can change. We don't have to keep doing that. We can stop.
Although technically, although in my personal opinion, Hollywood has sucked for a long time now. Of course, my experience is very unique because I'm an animation nut, and so the only thing I ever really watched was cartoons, and so maybe I'm separated from that culture. But to counter your social media conditioning, I grew up with like Steve Urkel. I grew up with Bill Cosby. I grew up with like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I grew up with all these images of the positive black family. And so, any negative stereotypes I have about black people are just black people I've met in real life. I've never met a negative, because I grew up in I guess in a very sheltered, entertainment-driven person who wanted to work in Hollywood one day. I never had a negative conditioning for people, so I have to wonder: is this conditioning like only for certain cops, or like the cops all collectively watching the negative stereotypes and only watching the positive stereotypes?
I'm sorry to. Yeah, I think what you're getting at is I mean, you I would say you had great parents, and you're probably an exception to what I would say is pop culture. So I got children, right? And we try our best not to expose our children to the negative stereotypes of black people, and really anybody, right? We don't teach our kids we don't really, there's no racial slurs being used in our household. I mean, what does happen is that me and my wife may talk about racial issues, and sometimes the older a kid gets, they may pick up context clues where we might be complaining about discrimination or racism and things like that. But I can say for certain that me and my wife, we spend no energy just like creating or training or even entertaining inherent negative traits of white people. Like I don't believe that. And it's just, I don't think it's the case. In another difference I see happening in the newer generations is that, so we have a lot of black people that are growing up in suburbs, and so I grew up in an all black neighborhood. It was a nice middle to upper class neighborhood, honestly. Kind of I believe to be a bit of an exception, but I grew up in a neighborhood where we had a whole bunch of black college educated people, professionals. There's not like serious crime. There's no gangs, just boys and girls growing up and playing together. And so, but my kids are growing up in a neighborhood where, our neighbors are white. And so there's a good chance that for the most part, our neighbor's kid and my kid really don't see as many distinctions and aren't, their minds are not as filled with the stereotypes that we were exposed to. Now, you said you weren't exposed to those things, but I would argue that the stereotypes that I'm complaining about, the things that cause people to build these biases into their minds. I think that was pop culture. If you go back and look at the '90s, you're gonna find that gangster rap was probably one of the best-selling music genres of the time, and it's sort of notorious for being popular in what we call like the white suburbs, right? That's one of the, like, if you watch, they did a documentary on NWA, and NWA like started off as a Black Power, socially conscious hip hop group. At some point early on, as far as like record labels, marketing, and management getting involved, they realized that they sold 10 times as many records by carrying like weapons in their videos, portraying a more like positive pro gang banging affiliations and imagery in their videos. And so anything that is popular and successful as far as NWA is concerned is really reinforcing that gangster rap, West Coast Snoop Dogg, smoking weed, men sleeping with as many women as possible, women being as free with their bodies as possible, all that going on. And I think that you will find that those negative stereotypes are pop culture, and what you were exposed to was your parents doing a great job of filtering it out.
Oh no, they tried, but the truth is, I never cared for rap, honestly, for any kind of aesthetic reason. I just liked it because there were sexy girls in the videos.
Exactly. There you go. Right.
But of course, I didn't really like the music. Like the only was there any rapper I liked as a kid? I think I liked one song. What's "Ride with Me" by Nelly, I think.
Yeah,
Nelly was the only like rapper I liked. I liked to a certain, like, there's one other song. No matter what I do, all I think about is you. You don't know what you mean to me. Whatever that Nellyville, I think it was called. Mm-hmm. But also to counter the whole social conditioning, because I grew up also in basically in a mostly Hispanic but mostly white neighborhood in the middle of the country, and every year we're told about Martin Luther King, how it's wrong to treat people differently on the basis of race, and it just seems like there's all these conflicting messages about what actually is part of the pop culture and what actually affects people, because it sounds to me like there's whatever counterparts or answer I have for conditioning, there's another reason. So there doesn't seem to be a strong correlation between, because we had this whole argument, like this whole debate about whether or not the video games caused like the Columbine shooting, but now we're having this conversation that, and universally agree that video games didn't cause violence. Now, for some reason, we're having this conversation that the video media causes racism and misogyny, and it just seems like we can't make up our minds on what the argument is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that was a decent point you made there, because like Martin Luther King is built into the public school system, and so a lot of kids are exposed to that as well. So I think in general in America, you're going to find almost everybody says, yeah, Martin Luther King was a good guy and he did good things, So there are some positives there. I forgot I was going to make a point, but I kind of forgot what you said.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to make this point that I was never exposed to social conditioning, so the idea that I'm going to because people are, when I first started exposed to white privilege, or the idea is basically check your privilege, and for people like me who's thought about for a while, like, okay, I've checked it, now what do I do?
Right. Yeah, that's that's a fair point.
Because the people want to turn that around and say like because white fragility, like, have you read Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility?
No.
The implication is that we literally live in a white supremacist society. Every white person is implicit in it, and if a white person denies that, that's evidence of their white fragility, because all white people are inherently racist, supporting a racist system, and it's created this weird. And people have been trying to incorporate this into corporations and workstation and work. And there's other YouTubers, I forget what the YouTuber's name is, Karen Kolotsky, and he's pointing out that this kind of division, this deliberate racial identification programs, are going to create nothing but strife in the workplace. And they do, because there's no evidence, because what little evidence there is either neutral or negative in all their presentations. And so when I hear about white privilege, I go, okay, I checked it, now what?
Right. So I mean, that's an issue, and it drives me crazy, because it makes my mission more difficult. Right? Is that like I got for every time I might make the argument that, hey, look, white privilege is an observed phenomenon. It's not an accusation, and I don't I don't say that you're guilty of anything because you happen to be white. That's just who you are. The same way that I'm black. But then you have people writing books where they're saying, you know, like you said. I mean, when I hear check your privilege, it comes off as a little finger pointy and aggressive, and I don't think it's to our benefit, right? Like you wouldn't if you had that type of conversation with a regular person at work or in the street, you know, in the grocery store, you're not expecting that conversation to go well, right? It just kind of lacks like common courtesy to turn it into like a little bit of an insult or like an offhanded like comment that's going to produce a negative reaction. If someone told me to check my black privilege, I'm immediately like sort of offended by that. So I understand that that natural. I think that reaction is natural. Is this? I mean, I wish that people wouldn't do that, but you know what I mean. I don't have any control over what everybody else does. You know, it's just, and it's unfortunate to me that, you know, I think it kind of seems that, you know, an otherwise you know, everyday white person might be exposed to the idea of check your privilege, which is sort of like the extreme version of, you know, we don't, you know, that black people are disadvantaged version of white privilege, that meaning of it. And you know, it's like, so that's kind of where I kind of blame scenarios like this James White video, right? It's like, I presume that in his video, he's talking to a congregation of, you know, Arizona white people who are probably not having a lot of interaction with common black people and are, you know, they're not in black media, they're not in black social spaces, they're probably not hearing clear message from anybody else. But then when they get from James White, Black Lives Matter is wrong on its just on the basis of mentioning race at all. Black Lives Matter is also Marxist and socialist, and it's sort of like, you know, if that's your first time hearing about Black Lives Matter, you've made it more difficult for us to come to common ground, you know, which is police brutality is wrong, racism is wrong, and not all police officers are bad people. You know, that's the common ground that I think every person would agree on if we sat down and wrote it down on paper. But instead, we got people telling us that saying Black Lives Matter is not Christian, and we got people saying that Black Lives Matter are socialist and Marxist, which might be true, but that doesn't have anything to do with us. We don't have anything to do with that.
Well, as a bit of insight, I actually do attend James White's church, actually.
Yeah, that's a good and interesting point.
Well, it's not. There aren't a lot of black people there, but there is a large Hispanic crowd. But the thing I do, but we've going on for an hour, but I do want to. Yeah. If you want to keep going, I do want to take this moment to, because I guess we kind of talked at general issues. I really want to criticize your arguments against on what James White said, because at one point in the video you mentioned how James White's arguing for this like new agey, like this new kind of theology where God is telling people that you shouldn't think about race and racism, and I don't get that at all from the video, because James White's pointing out that the clear division between the racial groups in the church is not acceptable in the church, and there are biblical verses to suggest that you can't think about these racial differences. You are the new man in Christ. And it goes back to my point about you trying to bring up Black Lives Matter as some sort of uniting clarion call for Christians. And I do find it kind of funny that you say like the world is saying that Black lives don't matter, when really every corporation on the planet is saying that Black lives matter.
Yes. So when I said the world in that statement, I meant the world as in Christians, right? So my point was that Christians should be advocating that Black Lives Matter, because in my mind it means that you're standing up against racism, and our complaint is that the world, as in the secular or you know, non-Christ world, right? The bad guys out there in the street are the ones implying that Black lives don't matter. And so I'm appealing to a Christian to say, you know, hey, I see that racism in the world and I'm against it. And that is what, someone like you saying Black Lives Matter means. And it's like, when you say all lives matter and you include Black lives, I count that. You know what I'm saying? Whether you're comfortable with saying Black Lives Matter or not, I what I hear in your heart and mind is that you don't think racism is okay, and Black people's lives are equal and do have value, and are we should not be treated differently simply because of the color of our skin, or someone else's inherent bias, or how they've been conditioned to see things as negative. So I think that we're in agreement in that point.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wouldn't have gotten that from your videos, which is kind of like the downside, because you are making these little quick cut videos, but you're not really fully articulating your perspective. And so when I hear you saying, because the thing, oddly, because as I said before, the sentence Black Lives Matter is not really, you're not trying to associate with the movement, but the way you're using it sounds like you're using it identically with the people who are evoking the movement.
Well, so I guess because I think of it as Black Lives Matter, the sentiment, the idea, and the statement. And as a Black person, I believe that I am in tune with most other Black people, the general Black person's perspective. And so, I mean, it's obviously, it's sort of not fair for me to just assume that I know what every Black person's thinking, but it's a liberty that, we take from time to time. And so yeah, I speak for I'm speaking for Black people in general, and saying that we don't agree with the organization. We don't know much about the organization, and it is separate to us in the sense that, for the most part, I think a lot of us are not even aware of the organization. Like, that is just not something that we are thinking about or talking about, and it's not the focal point or the issue at hand. The issue is, for us, is racism and police brutality. And so I feel like, the pairing it with the organization and the destruction of the nuclear family, and being against the patriarchy and all the other stuff that's in there, I don't think it's a fair match. But I get why it might not seem that way to other people, because if you're getting your information from James White, if that's your exposure to Black Lives Matter, if that's the person who's like giving you the definitive take on it, and you don't have a chance. You know what I'm saying? And if white privilege comes from the book that you read, right, and people are saying check your privilege to you, and it makes the problem worse, not better. So yeah, I mean, my YouTube video, I have some energy there for James White. I kind of make some assumptions about his heart and his theology. I don't think that I'm wrong about him, but I acknowledge that my video is biased for my perspective, and yeah, of course, you want to make it a little bit entertaining and a little bit inspirational, and it's that video is probably not going to be overwhelmingly convincing to a neutral, to a totally, for you, being a member of James White's church, being in Arizona, assuming the environment and the people that you socialize with, and what kind of television and movies and all the influences in your life, it may not be convincing to you. But I think for a neutral person, they can at least, if you can see the point of some of my criticism, some of the things that he's saying, and why I think that he's unfairly critical of Black Lives Matter. And then one of my points was that, like, honestly, he could have just left Black Lives Matter alone. You know what I mean? Like, I guess I understand that he believes that, as an apologetic, he has to be involved in every single part of the world. And so that's where I was like, okay, you got to speak on it. Well, here, I'm going to comment. I got something to say about what he had to say. You mind if I I got question here in the live chat, and I think I didn't do a good job of paying attention to those people. Can we put something out on the table?
Before we do that, let me just make the last comment by saying, well, I hear what you're saying, but hopefully next time when you make a video, you'll be able to articulate that better, because I believe your videos are kind of lacking in the content.
Right. I mean, sure. So we'll say this, right? A live stream like this, where we get to expand on our points and speak from a completely serious, everything matters that we say perspective. I think people might get something more from this, hopefully, and you know, the YouTube video is a YouTube video. You'll keep making yours the way you like them. I'll make mine. All right, I got a comment here from a guy. He's saying, he asked a question: do you think white people? And I think this question is really directed for you. ArtisticLayman. So, do you think white people? Let me check it first. Okay. Do you think white people deal with blacks outside of their preconceived prescription of what they think black people should or shouldn't do? I guess average white person, when they're dealing with a black person, do you believe that they're interacting with us with these preconceived notions of who we are and what we should and shouldn't do, or are you treating us with a sort of fair and unbiased, or are we getting a fair shake in our interactions, maybe?
I will, at the risk of trying to speak on behalf of all white people.
right.
Yeah, I guess. Well, in my experience, I would say that.
Okay.
I guess people in my, like, I know this is kind of a biased statement, but it's been my experience that the conservative people are always trying to approach blacks as individuals, whereas liberals are always trying to approach blacks as like inferior, like weaker or lesser people who are oppressed by society, and they're always condescending to them.
Interesting point. Oh man, and you brought up a question that was really okay. I give a little bit of clarity here. He followed up. He said, do white people come to the table thinking they know what black people should do, or do they take time to actually listen and be taught? So I guess he's kind of saying that you know, a black and white interaction, maybe we have this idea that a white person shows up. So I guess, you know, as a black person, we feel like we know what needs to happen. We know what is happening to us, and that you guys might be more open to listening rather than trying to give us advice up front, you know?
It depends. I guess it would depend on the subject, because if it's a subject I know a lot about, I always assume that I'm right, and so I'm trying to tell you how to be, or how the subject should be approached. But if it's a subject I don't know about, I do want to, because I have this rule where I want to be right all the time, which of course means I have to be open to criticism and correction. So by all means, I think I'm right, but if I'm wrong, please correct me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have that same approach to things. Like, I wouldn't say it if I didn't think I was right about it, and if I don't think I'm right about it, I'll usually mention that. But I mean, I guess I could see this kind of issue being applied. I mean, the guys that kind of come to mind that might be guilty of this is sort of you might hear like a Bill O'Reilly or a Hannity, or you know, someone like that. You know, even there's black voices on YouTube that I know about. You know, I'll mention like Officer Tatum and ABL a lot. I actually find ABL's channel kind of enjoying, entertaining. Officer Tatum is, I don't think, as interesting intellectually, and I don't think he's as politically savvy. So he's really kind of more just a reaction and dramatic guy. But I think of some of those conservative, you know, white voices that are basically kind of like champions of the old Fox News talking head. They can spin anything for it to be the Democrats' fault or black people's fault or whatever. I definitely think that they are not really legitimately listening with an open heart to hear, like, hey, here's what we think is happening, here's what's wrong, and you know, can you be open to like seeing things differently or helping us change certain structures so that they are more fair. But can I put one out to you, uh, ArtisticLayman, about a comment you made? I think you mentioned this the quote unquote Karen, right?
Oh yes, the Karen.
Yeah, and I happen to believe I haven't like mastered this point yet, so I'm not totally sold on taking a firm position on it, but I'm kind of inclined to say that Karen is a little racist, because I think uh, almost always Karen is going to be a white woman, conservative. I mean, the parts that are not defensible is that she's sort of complaining about something absurd and ridiculous, and something probably calling the police and using the police as her personal enforcer, as opposed to law enforcement. And the part that I thought was interesting is that you mentioned that you believe Karen to be pretty much all those things, but also a liberal, and that was very confusing to me, because I think the Karen is is a um, is a conservative right wing person inclined to being racist, or at least biased towards black people, and so that's kind of
Which is always weird, because I've been in Republican and conservative circles my whole life. I've never heard, and I've only heard disparaging comments about black people when I started to finding people on the quote unquote alt right or alternative internet. I've never heard. I honestly never heard a racial slur until I went to college, which will most likely be told me by a liberal professor or someone liberal at school, and so. And so it's been my experience that Karens are always like, but the thing about Karens, whether it be right wing or left wing, if there is a variation, they're always self-righteous busybodies who's using the law for their own personal benefits.
Right. So we're agreed that it's bad behavior on the Karens.
Yeah.
And I think I can understand that your experience, right? It's like you know, if you're in, I'm going to make assumptions about you again. If you're in sort of like a conservative Christian Republican, mainstream Republican circle, I could believe that you're not going to hear racial slurs, tossed around, and I think you would find the same practice in the Democratic version of that, right? Like, I'm a Democrat, and the people that I associate with, and my friends and family, you're not gonna hear like legitimate like racial slurs or things like that. What you'll hear a lot of is discussions on power structures in America, racism, complaints. On the worst end of it, you'll hear some conspiracy theories and this, these like system, the system is against us type of things, which is another video and another conversation. But
although I did have, there's only one experience where that would be the case, where I've met a quote unquote liberal family, and on both occasions they were talking about how the world would be a better place if the vast majority of people in Congress were black. I said, well, what if they were Republican? And they're like, wait, that can't happen. Black people, like, the implication being that black people can't be Republicans.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So I just don't even know what to say about that. I mean, it is not common for black people to be Republicans right now. That does seem to be changing, although it is a little concerning to me that some of the change is sort of like flipping from one. So I think the average black Democrat right now is pretty centrist, right? Like, black people, we have a heavy Christian influence in our culture. Obviously, if you look at crime and some of the music and things that we that we have going on, you might say, well, that doesn't add up. But the average black person, I think, is going to identify as a Christian, which sort of inherently makes them socially conservative, and so we're coming from that, and some of us are like turning to the Republican Party because of the social issues, I believe, and now, but when you end up in some of the people that are winding up identifying with like Republican or conservative identification, you end with someone who uh, does appear and does sort of like start to parrot the conversation that kind of makes you sound like you are sort of abandoning your blackness altogether. They got this new little catchphrase or hashtag, they call it Blexit, right? Where I think it's basically black people leaving the traditional democratic perspective of things, finding themselves to be a conservative. But then you have these like crazy black conservatives who, they find everything to be wrong with black people. It's almost like they're racist against their own people now. You know what I mean? And so that, I don't think that is good. But
yeah, Blexit, but Candace Owens.
Yeah, Candace Owens is Blexit. I mean, she makes some decent points. There's a lady in running for office, and I think she was running for the position that John Lewis, who just died, obviously left in his death. Rest in peace. But she was running for his position, and she's a black woman running as a conservative Republican. Her name is Angela Stanton King, and I think she makes a lot of reasonable arguments that would appeal to the mainstream Black America. And so that is a type of conservatism that I would be more comfortable with, and something that I think would be to our benefit. I think if we get because she is advocating and arguing for these are things and views and ways and positions that the Republicans hold that can and will be to the benefit of black people. So you're operating in a position of uplifting your ethnic group, not to put us above anybody else, but just to like get us to the same place, or to the place that we want to be and where we need to be. But I think that's a lot different than what obviously it becomes problematic if your time and energy is spent pointing out how all the other black people are no good, as if you are not one of us. That's not, we can't have that. Well,
I guess I guess at this point, do we have any other questions?
We did the two that I saw. He had a few other points. Black Lives Matter is biblical. We kind of talked about that. White privilege is definitely real. We talked about that. He wanted to get on the conversation. We have to figure that out another time. If we're having other people speaking in here.
Oh, well, you could send him a link to the Hangouts if you want.
Yeah, right. I know. I just, for the live stream, I want to, until we.
Do we master all our boomer tech problems?
Yeah, yeah. It's like, we're both YouTubers, so I think we have more assurance that like how we would handle things, and I just but yeah, we can work on that another time. I enjoyed the conversation.
Well, if there's anything else, should we make some closing statements, I guess?
Yeah, knock yourself out, man. I'll go off of what you.
And let me just say, I really appreciate you taking the chance to do a live stream with me, because recently I've been on this kick where after my last little moment with Matt Dillahunty on the Atheist Experience, I've decided rather than going in pointless comment sections with people, I would actually invite them to live stream discussions. And so far, very few people have bothered to show up on that. I also found out one of the best ways to end a pointless conversation is ask them to come live.
right.
But just on the closing comment, because it seems to me this. You seem to have a strong fidelity to the term Black Lives Matter, and I'm not sure why, because it seems like you are advocating for a position of all lives matter. Because I don't think, you and James White, I don't think only disagree on the use of the term, but you seem to be wanting the same things. Just we're arguing over language. And so if there's anything to close on, I'm more than happy to talk about other things like this, like this topic, because I really want to have more conversations. And because one of the biggest problems in our culture is that we are so polarized, and that no one will have a common conversation. But conversations are really what help us move forward and have us have a meaningful understanding of each other. And so once again, thank you, and just go all lives matter. We don't need to only be black.
Yeah, it was good meeting you. I appreciate the conversation. I am all for intellectual debate and challenging, and kind of to your point, a good way to end that meaningless conversation is to have it in person. And I'll give you a little bit of culture is like we would just say have that same energy. You know what I mean, when we see each other in person. So I I do think I enjoy this because it it grounds the conversation, because on the internet, in texting and typing, people get a little carried away with their things they're saying, and you have like a lot of crazy people out there in the world. But
Are you familiar with the penny arcade theory?
I heard of penny arcade. I don't know this theory that you're talking about.
Yeah, take a normal person, give them anonymity and an audience, and they become a complete jerk.
Yeah.
Well, they use more explicit language, but that's the I can't say curse.
It's like that power thing, right? I mean, money or power or whatever, it'll make you more of who you are. And I guess that people find themselves empowered on YouTube and the internet. So for me, I would leave you with that. Yes, I do believe and agree that all lives matter, right? I am a Christian, and I think that Christianity does teach that. And my attachment and my defense of the term Black Lives Matter it's not that. So you may get that impression because I mention it a lot in my videos. I mention it a lot in the stuff with James White, and I am vigorously defend the statement as being wholesome and something that is acceptable in Christ and all of that. But it's mostly in reaction to the thing that I see, which scares me and I find to be very problematic, is that people would be critical of Black Lives Matter, the sentiment or the statement. And I understand the criticism of the organization, and to an extent I agree with that, right? From my Christian perspective, from my common sense perspective. So it's not that like I spend my time and energy running around screaming Black Lives Matter, and it's just that if I hear someone, I have a lot of energy in response to someone being critical of it, or saying that it's not true, or that it's bad, because I think the things that, like what you're seeing, the advocacy that you see from people like LeBron James and people like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I think there's a lot of good-natured, good intention, good and well-intended defense of the idea and the concept Black Lives Matter, being against police brutality, being against racism. That's what Black Lives Matter means to me, and so I will come to defend it. But it's not, I'm not here to fight about all lives matter, except for the point that that it's often used as a sort of a hiding place for someone who has hardness in their heart to acknowledge that a Black person's life does matter, or they do it in this reaction, right? Because I think you're aware that the all lives matter sentiment was really, although I agree that it has original biblical sources, it was not a hashtag or a catchphrase that was used in public spaces until after Black Lives Matter, and it was, a lot of people use it as sort of a retort or a rejection of Black Lives Matter, and that is where I take issue. So I probably made you want to say something else.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what it is. Yeah. It's a reaction to this reaction that people think is not biblically based and racially motivated. But I guess if there's anything else to add, I guess I presented my closing piece about the concern. I guess the closing concern of like but there is a danger that people could misuse the term Black Lives Matter, say, oh yeah, I'm against police brutality, but I won't do a thing about it. Which having Kamala Harris, because that's a whole other discussion. We have a man who has a dementia patient and a horribly brutal prosecutor cop. but I guess I'll end with this. Don't forget, everyone listening, don't forget to like or dislike this video, add to your favorites, or share if you really liked it. Leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to see future videos and follow us on social media.
Yeah, good job, man. Yeah, hit the like, subscribe button on my channel as well. Thank you, ArtisticLayman. It was nice meeting you, and I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, everybody.
And one last phrase, may the will of God be your way.
All right, I'll let you have that.